Hello, everybody. We are going to be working on exercise 11 in chapter 3. This is the exercise that we're building, 11A, which is to create a class named sandwich um, with specific data fields that are implied here for main ingredient, bread type, double for price. And then we'll also have methods to do get and sets for each of the field. And then we're going to save this as a class file. As I just said to you guys right before I hit the record button, a class file is different. It's the blueprint file for creating an object, where when we create an application, it actually executes. This has a main method. This will not. Okay, so we're going to be creating two files. Back in Eclipse, I'm going to come here to my current working project, which is chapter 3, part 2, creating a class file. And this one I'm going to call sandwich. And it does say this in the description to call it sandwich.java. And I'm just going to call it sandwich here. Now, to break this habit that we're in the habit of clicking this public static void main so we don't have to type it out. But in this case, we do not need it, right? Because it's not going to be executing. This is our blueprint file. It's the class file. So I'm just going to go ahead and click finish on this. And here's our blank class. All right. We were told in the instructions to include data fields for the main ingredient, which is a string for bread type, and a double for price. And normally when we create data fields for a class file, we put those right up at the top. And typically we set these to private. And the reason we set them to private is we don't want code externally being able to directly change these values. If there's going to be a change to the value, we want to use a method to do it. So it kind of basically protects whatever object we create from being altered, is really a good way to put it. So we were told to create a string with a main ingredient. So I'm just going to call it main ingredient. Okay? I'm not putting anything in it. Right? We're just creating the structure to hold it. Let's create another private, once again, a string, and this will be the bread. And we'll call it bread type. So it could be like rye or wheat or white or, gluten-free or whatever you choose. Maybe it's a tortilla and it's a wrap. One more for price. This one will be a double, and we'll just call it price. Like that. Right. So now what this is telling us is when we create, this is the blueprint, right? We'll use the analogy of the dog again, what are things that dogs have in common? Well, they have a name, they have an age, a breed, etc. Here we're thinking of what do sandwiches have in common? Well, they have bread, the stuff you put in between the bread, and then there's a price. Now, you can think about this. You could have a cheese type and what kind of dressing, and do you want veggies on it, and do you want to cut, and, all those types, toasted, whatever. But we're looking at fundamentals here. So looking at the main ingredient, the bread type, and the price. All right. The other thing that they're asking us to do, right, and if you heard me say this, right, we set these to private, these data fields, because they travel with whatever object we create. And we don't want code just being able to go in there and just say, well, this steak sandwich is now a cheese sandwich. You just change the main ingredient with code. We don't want to allow that easily, right? We want to make them work for it to do it. Now, we have this thing that we do when we're writing code that we call get and set. And this is a really important part of the chapter. And basically, it kind of works like this. For each one of these data fields, because it's private to the object, if I want to ask the object, hey, what kind of meat is on this sandwich? I have to do what we call a get statement to return that value. Otherwise, I can't see it. Right? So I would write a public method that would return a string. So it's going to send the string back to whoever's asking. And we're going to call it get main ingredient. And as the name implies, it's going to reach into the object, get that piece of information, and send it back. Right? Where's it getting it from? Well, it's getting it from whatever object you're asking. If you ask the ham sandwich, it's going to return ham. If you ask the steak sandwich, it's going to return steak. If you ask the cheese sandwich, it returns cheese, right? And so it's basically built into the object. Where is it built in? Well, in the private data field, right? So that will get set somehow. But right now we're just getting the information. And so all that needs to go inside these curly brackets is just a return statement that says, return the main ingredient. Somebody asked for it, tell them what's in the sandwich, basically. So there you go. There's the main ingredient. Now, with the main ingredient, what if you, all right, let's say there's ham on the sandwich, and then you're like, you know what? Change my mind, I want chicken or turkey, right? We need to also have a way to set the value for the main ingredient. So we'll create another public method. This will not return anything, so it's void. But this one we will call set main ingredient. So instead of letting people know what is in the sandwich, we're actually going to send it a different ingredient, and then that's going to change the ingredient in the sandwich. So here in the parentheses, we have to be able to receive a new description for what we're making or putting in the sandwich. So that's going to be a string data type, and we're just going to call this main ingredient. So we're sending this in, right? And then inside of the method, what we're going to do is we're going to take, this is kind of weird, but we're going to take the main ingredient for this current sandwich, and we're going to set it equal to the main ingredient that I just sent in. Kind of weird, right? Because it's kind of redundant in a sense, right? So this works, but you can tell Eclipse isn't liking it, right? Because this variable name is the same as this variable name, the same as that variable name. So if you really want to follow good programming practice, you might just call this like main. I'm just doing an example here, and I'm not going to keep it. You might call it like main ing or something, and then change this to main ing so we don't have that weird conflict. I'm not going to do that though, and I'm going to show you why in just a moment. All right, so then how do I differentiate the one that we're about to store, which matches this one, right? And you notice how like when I click on the main ingredient here, Eclipse recognizes I'm talking about that one. When I click on the main ingredient here, it's a little confused as to which one I'm talking about. So we use this weird convention inside of Java, this thing that we did in Python. So the Python people will kind of remember this a little bit. Remember we used this thing called self? We did objects and classes in Python. You might go, oh yeah, that thing. I don't remember it at all, but it was a thing, right? In Java and most other languages, by the way, we use the keyword this. So when we're referring to this main ingredient, and you notice what happened with the highlighting right away, right? The highlighting was, oh, this main ingredient. Which one? Well, the one we're currently talking about. You know, like right now it's ham, but you want to change it to chicken, right? So we're sending chicken here, chicken goes there, and then what used to be ham now becomes chicken, right? But we use this self-referring thing so that we don't get any conflicts. So the engine inside, the compiler knows what are we talking about here? Which main ingredient? This one, the one for this sandwich, the one that we're currently working with. Right. So now notice what we did here is for this one private data field, we created what we call a get method, which gets the information that it currently is holding. And we created a set method, which allows us to change what ingredient it's currently holding. So that's called a set and a get, right? I did them in the opposite order, but in program, we call these setters and getters. Once again, the reason we do this is because these methods are public. So an outside program could call it to get the information or call it to set the information. without actually being able to directly access the variable because it's set to private. Right? If I set this to private, it would never change. It wouldn't work, by the way. So that's the typical pattern. Set your data fields to private and then have public setters and getters to either retrieve the value or change the value. Right. So what we are being asked to do in this program, though, right, go back to the instructions, is include methods to get and set values for each of these fields. Well, I did it for the first field. That means I have to do this again twice for each one of these. So 4 more getters and setters. All right, I'm going to show you a really cool trick in Eclipse and why you want to use a better IDE and not use like JGrasp or something, right? I'm actually going to delete these. And I'll do a cut, so if I need to paste them back in, I can do that. But once I've created a basic class file and I've put in some data fields at the top, Eclipse is pretty smart. It has this tool built in. And if I right click here and there are these, where is it? Under refactor, right? No, not under refactor, under source. Here it is. It's under source. So if you right click in your code and then you go to source, you'll notice that there's this entry on that menu. And this is so cool, right? Notice this little entry. It says generate getters and setters. And watch what it does. Brings up a little box and says, which one do you want getters and setters for? Bread type, main ingredient, and price? Which the answer is yes to all of them. And I'm also noticing there's these little arrows, right? So I can actually come in here and see what it's creating. And in some cases, maybe I don't want them to be able to set the main ingredient, so I can uncheck it and not create it. But watch what happens when I hit OK, by the way. All of them are set to public because we want outside programs to be able to change things or access things, right? And then we'll say OK, and then look what it did, folks, right? Isn't that worth the price of admission right there? It just wrote a bunch of lines of code. Now, I want you to think about this a little bit more. If I had 20 private data fields at the top, it would have just created 40 getters and setters for me with a couple of clicks. And more importantly, they're all correct. There's no syntax errors. Notice that they followed the exact same format that I did, and they're using the keyword this for all the setters, right? This is beautiful. This is so quick and easy. This file is not. Right? So this is our blueprint file. We do have getters and setters. We will learn also about constructors, and then we will also learn about methods that travel. But these are basic methods for getting and setting. Pretty typical to just always include getters and setters, but there are times when logically you don't want to, right? So in this case, we do, right? Who says you can't change your sandwich order? You sure can, right? All right, so this file is done. I'm going to do a Control S. Real interestingly, and you guys might try this. You're like, well, it's all set. Let's run it. You hit the run button. All right. And what's it running? It's running the previous program. It's not running the current one. And the reason for that is, by the way, so I'm going to stop that for a moment. There's nothing here that can execute. There is no public static void main. There's no main method. None of this code will execute. This is a blueprint. I can compile it, right? If I had a syntax error in here, just for example, if I would have like omitted something, I can get errors that I have to fix, but this will never run. And I'm just going to save it and leave it alone. Next comes the second part of the program creation, right? So we did part A. Now we're going to do part B. Now we're going to create an application. That means with a main method named test sandwich that will instantiate one sandwich object and demonstrates the use of set and get method. And you know what? We're going to take it farther than that. They want us to call this application test sandwich. Okay, so let's do that. Let's go back to Eclipse. And now we're going to create a new class file in that same folder. This one will have a public static void main. And we're going to call it test sandwich. And then we'll click finish. Right? Now, a bunch of interesting stuff is going to be happening here as we kind of write this code. You know, we're going to learn how to first create a sandwich by calling in the sandwich class. All right, so this is pretty weird, but if you think about like how we do the scanner, like, and when we create the scanner, we use the keyword scanner, and then we give it a name, and then we say new scanner system in. Remember all that, right? All that stuff. Well, creating a sandwich is kind of the same as creating a scanner. So I start with the name of my class file, which is sandwich with the capital S. So I just type sandwich. Notice it's underlining red. Okay. Let's just keep typing here. So we'll call the first sandwich the first sandwich. So that's what I'm naming it. First sandwich. Equal sign. Here comes the keyword new, which means we're instantiating an object. And what type of object? Sandwich object, right? With parentheses. This is called the constructor, by the way. So it looks for basically a class file named sandwich. And as long as it's in the same folder, you just use its name, right? They are in the same folder, see, right here, right? And we're going to name it first sandwich, and then we run the constructor, which is the name of the class with empty parentheses, and it creates the object in memory. And how does it do it? It goes to the blueprint and goes, what's your blueprint for sandwich? Oh, you have 3 private data fields and a bunch of getters and setters. So it creates this object, it builds 3 variables into it, builds the methods that allow it to set and get, and then that object is basically this code with a different name. And all of the capabilities that are in this code are in that first sandwich, right? So back in the test sandwich program, well, now that we've created a sandwich, well, we created a sandwich, but we didn't say what bread it is, what ingredients it is, or what the price is. Okay, so we're going to do that. So from now on, because I've now created first sandwich in memory, I just refer to that first sandwich directly. It's a copy of the blueprint, right? And well, I do want to set the bread type. So notice what I do here, and this is really kind of neat, right? So I type first sandwich, which it recognizes as the sandwich object. And then when I hit the dot that follows, it reaches into the object and sees that there's a get bread type, get main ingredient, get price. There's also a set bread, set main ingredient, and set price. What I want to do in this situation is I want to set the bread, the ingredient, and the price. All of them are set. So I'm just going to start typing set. Notice how it narrows down. And the first thing I'm going to set is the bread type. So set the bread type, and then inside here, I just need to put a string. I'm going to put my sandwich on rye bread. Okay, so my sandwich is on rye. Then I'm going to call first sandwich dot. Now I want to set the ingredient. So what it's really doing here, as I'm narrowing down, is it's finding this method inside the first sandwich object, and we're just calling it and using it because it's part of the object. This is what's so cool about it, right? I'm going to have, mine's going to be corned beef. That's kind of like the sandwich I wish I had today, right? Corned beef on rye. We have a nice little Jewish deli up the road from our house here that makes really, really good sandwiches like that. All right, we also need to set the price. So we're going to say first sandwich dot set price. And here we'll put in a number. This needs to be a double, so it will not be in quotes. It'll be, actually, they're not that cheap anymore. I was going to put $6.99, but if you guys shop for sandwiches lately, they're expensive. And I think that the price of a good corned beef sandwich at that place up the road is about this much now, unfortunately. So $14.99 is the number I'm hard coding in there. Okay. So now I've created a sandwich called first sandwich. It's a new sandwich. I'm setting its bread type to rye. What is the syntax? Setting the main ingredient to corned beef and setting the price to $14.99. Okay. Now I want to make sure that it works, right? Okay, so hypothetically, I've created an object in memory and I've set its private data fields to something that it wasn't when it first got created. So when I first created it, it doesn't have any, bread type, meat, or price. Now I just want to see what those are. So I'm just going to do a simple system out print line. I am dumping this all on the screen at once. It's going to be a copy paste. You guys can take your time and type it in. But here comes the printout on this. So I'm going to do a system out print line, and I'm just going to simply say, you ordered, and I want you to look at the syntax on this after I do my spacing. You ordered, so this is just text, concatenating. Now I'm calling the sandwich itself. I don't know what's inside of it, but if I get the main ingredient, it's going to come back with corned beef. So it's going into the object, running the method that returns the private data field. Okay, so I ordered corned beef on, well, I'm going to get the bread type this time. That's going to be rye. So corned beef on rye, which costs $, and here it's getting the price. So at this point, this is really all you need to do to make this a successful program, by the way, is run this. This is executable because it does have a main method. When it runs, it will find the sandwich.java class file, create a sandwich object according to this blueprint with all of these features. And then after it's created, we will set the bread, set the meat, set the price, and then we'll reach in and get the ingredients, the bread, and the price and put them back on the screen to prove that it worked. Okay, so here goes. Running it. And yes, we're saving test sandwich. I forgot to save it. Okay, and there it is. You ordered corned beef on rye, which costs $14.99. I guess it worked. Right. That's not very exciting output, but when you think about the steps that I just pointed out, once again, we created a blueprint, private data fields, and a bunch of capabilities. Here in the main program, we created one of those objects in memory. We set its values with the set commands. We retrieved its values with the get commands and put them back on the screen to prove that that sandwich object is now, something different. Now, let's prove that this works. Let's do this again, right? So this is really good practice. So once again, I'm going to create another sandwich object. And I'll call this maybe second sandwich, right? Very, very clever name. So once again, this will be a new sandwich, empty parentheses. Now, like I did with the first one, I'm just going to say second sandwich dot, well, this time it doesn't matter the order we do this in. Let's set the main ingredient, and I'm going to set that to be ham. Then we will set the bread type, set and bread type. Then that's going to be set to, let's put that on wheat bread. Then we will also get that second sandwich. It's not equals, but set price. And we'll make that one, that'll be the affordable one. That'll be $9.99. And once again, we can take the same statement here, copy it, and then just simply change all the firsts down here to second. One more. All right. And now we're going to run it again. Now you will see the difference, folks, right? So run. So we had a corned beef on rye, which cost $14.99, and then we ordered ham on wheat, which cost $9.99. So proof that it works. I'm going to pause here for just a second and mute myself, you guys. So I'm going to pause the recording. But I'll leave this up on the screen. Make sure you get it to work and then let me know if it works. All right. So one last little tidbit that we added here, I didn't realize I had paused the recording, is I had made an alteration to the second sandwich. Like I changed the main ingredient to cheese. And then I did another output just to show that it did indeed change, which you can see here on the screen. All right. We're going to move on to the next exercise then. That next exercise is exercise 12, I believe. And we're working on this student file here. And this one actually has 3 parts. So hopefully we can get this done in the time that we have left. And let's read the instructions first to begin with. It says, first, create a class named student that has fields for an ID number, number of credit hours earned, number of points earned. For example, many schools compute grade point averages based on a scale of 4. So a 3 credit hour class in which a student earns an A is worth 12 points, right? Include methods to assign values to all the fields, right? And I want you to read that carefully. To assign values to all the fields. It's not saying anything about retrieving the values from the fields, right? So if you really want to get picky about it. A student also has a field for grade point average. So then we're going to include a method to compute the grade point average by dividing the points by credit hours earned. So we're going to add a method that does something that's not a getter or a setter. That's what that's telling you. And then write methods to display the values in each student field. All of those are going to be in the class file. So the class file is not just going to have data fields and do getters and setters. It's also going to do some math, right? And then also do display for us too. Nobody said that you can't do that in there, so that's what we're going to do. Right? So let's do that part of it. So back in Eclipse, I'm going to create a new class file. I'm going to call this one student. Capital S. No public static void main. This is going to be a blueprint file or a class file. So here's the file. We were asked to put in 3 data fields. So I'm just going to paste these in, by the way, if you're how I type so quickly. So I have 3 privates. I'm assuming these are all integers, right? That's what I'm doing. Right? I don't think it said otherwise. I guess I probably should double check. Yeah, it doesn't say anything about it. I'm using integers. So I have an integer called ID number, an integer called hours, and an integer called points. All right. And you know what? Let's think about how we're going to do this, because we learned just a little while ago that it's a good idea to have getters and setters for all of these, right? And there's a really easy way in Eclipse to do it. So why not use the easy way? So I'm just going to right click inside of here, go to source, and then generate getters and setters. And then I'm just going to select all of them, right? So be able to get and set for all of them. If I really want to be persnickety about this, and I don't, right? I'm just telling you I don't. It does say include methods to assign values to all fields, right? Why don't we want to create one that gets the values? Well, the reason is because we're going to write methods to display the values here, so we don't need to do a get. That's the why, right? So if you really wanted to be persnickety about this, and some people are like that, right? We would just have sets and not gets, because the gets will do as far as displays. I'm not going to do it that way, but I'm showing you that you can tweak it. I'm just going to do it all. Who cares, right? Not a big deal, right? But if you wanted to control that, you could. But wow, how cool is this, right? I mean, just the fact that you're working with this IDE, set up some data fields, right click, 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 boom, you got all these getters and setters. Talk about a time-saving piece. And more importantly, right, and this is the bigger takeaway, it's accurate and it works, right? You didn't mistype anything, or not capitalize when you should have, all those things. So I really like this approach for making your getter setters get created. just eliminates a whole lot of mistakes. The other thing I tend to do with getters and setters is when I'm in a class file, I usually push those to the bottom, because they're kind of like pedestrian and like normal day-to-day operation kind of stuff. So here, we need to start like doing some of the other stuff that they're talking about. And so let's go look at the next set of instructions here. All right. And it tells you, okay, what the data fields are. Include methods to assign values to all fields. Did it. The student also has a field for grade point average. They include a method to compute the grade point average field by dividing the points by credit hours earned. Okay, so I'm kind of reading this, right? I can read this a few different ways, right? And I'm going to read my own thing into it. So some people would look at this and say, oh, I need to create something that is a field. So that's a data field, right? And yeah, and you can do it that way, but really we just need the grade point average. Well, I can just do that as a method and send it back to the program that's asking. And so here's how I'm going to do that. I'm just going to create a public method. I'm going to call, it's going to return a double. That's going to be a GPA because it could be a decimal number. Right? And I'm just going to call it get grade point. I guess you can call it get grade point average. Just get, let's just call it get grade point AVG. How about that? That's pretty good. Do I need to send that any information in order to calculate it? Well, the answer to that is no. Because these values, we're going to assume all of these values are already set within the object, right? They're not set yet, but they're going to be. And then I can just go right to returning the result of the calculation. So I can just do a return statement here that's basically the points multiplied. Okay, so this is kind of weird. The point, and how do you get a grade point average? It's the points earned divided by the credit hours, basically. This is the general formula. However, right, and I'm looking at my previous solution here, I threw in this where I multiplied something by 1.0. Why the heck am I multiplying by 1.0? Well, here's the answer to that. Because points are an integer and hours are an integer. If I divide an integer into an integer, that's integer division, and I won't get any decimal points. So by adding the 1.0 into the calculation, the regular integer division gets rid of the point whatever. By adding 1.0, which doesn't change the value at all. 1 times the number is a number, but the 0.0 allows it to then calculate it as a double and be more accurate, basically. So that's kind of the why, right? There's kind of the complete answer to that, right? So this is just a little trick. And another way that we could have done it is we could have made those doubles up top, but I'm just showing you kind of another little feature of Java, right? So there's the get grade point average. It just returns the points times 1 divided by the hours. That'll be a decimal number. So from the main program, we'll say get grade point average, and it will just show it. The other thing that we're told to do is to, instead of using get and then just doing system out prints in the main program, we can write some methods here that will show us what the ID number is, what the credit hours are, and the points earned. And we can do that right here. And these will all be public methods. So all of these will be basically the same. They'll be public void. We're not returning anything. We're just putting stuff on the screen. The first one we'll call show ID number. This is how I named it last time. So I'm just kind of following that. And then curly brackets. And then this is just going to be a system out print line. So I'm copy pasting this in, by the way. So there's my show ID number. So if I want Now what the ID number is, I just say show ID number, and there it is. We're going to want to do the same thing for show hours and show points. So I'm just copy pasting this stuff in, folks. So you might like hurriedly try to copy it, right? Show ID number, show hours, show points, and they're just system out prints, right? So there is that aspect of it. Now I'm going to go here and look. Methods to set out fields. Grade point average, did that. Method to compute the grade point average field by dividing by the points and credit hours earned. Okay, we did that. Then we write methods to display the values in each student field. We did that too. So part A is complete, right? Not very exciting, but it is complete. All right. Next, it says write a class named show student that instantiates a student object from the class and assign values to its field. So this is kind of what we did with the sandwich. Then compute the grade point average and then display all the values associated with the student. Okay, so that's going to be a program called show student. So let's go ahead and create that. Back over to Eclipse. And if you haven't saved the student file yet, make sure you save it. Now I'm going to create another new class file. And this one will be called show student. This will have a public static void main since it will execute. And then we'll get rid of those comments there. And now we're going to start like building this. And we'll start by just creating a student. All right, so I'm going to call the student class. I'm going to say student. I don't know. Let's call him pupil. And give a name. And then we're going to create a new student. And notice when we create the new student, it looks like we're calling a function, and we technically do call this a function. It's a constructor function, is what we call it, right? But that's pretty typical. Now we'll take that pupil and we will set the ID number. And this is an integer, so I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're also going to set the points. And this person has 47 points. And then we're also going to set the hours. And this person has 15 hours. So there we are. Running 3 integers in there. Now we've created the pupil. We've assigned values to the 3 data fields. Now let's take a look at those data fields. So this is, if you want to put comments in here, you could do something like set the data fields for the new objects. What we're doing in the first statement, if you care enough to put comments in, right, is instantiate, right, to create from the blueprint a student object named pupil. And then the third step is to show that the pupil object has maintained its set values by putting it on the screen. So we're going to use pupil.show. And which are we going to show? Well, let's start with ID number. Let's do them in the same order. And that's all I have to do, right? I don't have to send anything to it. It's just going to put it on the screen. And then we'll say pupil.show points. Would make sense. I'm just following the pattern from above, if you're wondering. Then we're going to do show hours. So let's show the ID, points the hours. Right. Those are already system out print lines, so this is going to trigger stuff to the screen. Now we will put some words on screen. That's what we're doing here. We're going to do a system out print line and show the calculated GPA. right? By basically calling that other method that we created called get grade point, right? So that system out print line is going to look like this. Now mine is stretching over 2 lines. I really kind of don't need to do that here, do I? But here's the whole statement, right? And really, I didn't call it get grade point. I called it get grade point average, correct? So this is going to put this on the screen. It's going to go into the object, get the grade point average, which is the calculated value, and then bring that back, right? And show it to us. Right. Let's run this and see if it even works. So let's do this. Control S to save. And here comes the run. There it is. Let's see if it worked. So the ID number is 12345. Points earned, credit hours, and the GPA, right? So we create the object, we set the values, we show the values, and then we just do a system out print that calls a different method that puts it on the screen. Right. Now we can do this again to make sure that it's working. So I'm just copy pasting all of this in at once, by the way, so don't like freak out to it. But we are creating another pupil. We'll call him pupil 2, right? And notice what I'm doing here is I'm going to show ID points and hours and get the grade point average, which I apparently spelled differently last time. So I'm going to fix that. And let's put that on the screen and see what happens here. So here comes the run on this. And notice what happens here, right? With the first student, we set the values, right? We did sets. So we set the values. So when we did show, it shows them and the GPA. Here, we never set the values. We just asked it to show. And then when we went to do the GPA, we got this really weird output that is NaN. And it's not a type of bread, by the way. It is a shortcut acronym for not a number, meaning it can't calculate something. So it's just putting this on the screen showing it can't calculate it. Right. If I wanted to fix this, I would basically take statements like these, where we're setting the values. So after we create the second student, we would set the values. These would all be pupil 2, by the way, right? And then, ideally we would use like some different numbers here. And it doesn't really matter. Let's run it again just to prove that it works. Right, but there it is. Oh, it says errors. It goes, all right, so what did I do wrong here? Oh, I put in a number that was way too big for that data type. So let's just make it a whole lot smaller. Let's do that. Now let's run it again. Saving. Here's the run. And then the second time, notice that it did maintain values and was able to show them. And because it was able to show them, it could calculate a GPA. One that doesn't make sense, but that's not the takeaway here. The real big takeaway is getting this to work. A couple more things we're going to do here before we wrap up. There's another part to this exercise, and that part is show student 2. And here we're going to create a constructor for the student class, and it should initialize each student ID number when we create them to 999 or to his points to 12 and credit hours to 3 automatically when we start. So in order to do that, I have to go back to the original blueprint file and create a constructor. A constructor in a Java class file, usually we put that up at the top, right below the data fields. That's kind of the convention on it. But the way a constructor is built, we will basically add to the student file a method that has the same exact name as the class. So we create a public, we call it student. Notice there's no return type on this, by the way, right? And curly brackets. And when we're calling, so in other words, when we're in the other program and we're calling new student, it looks for the constructor function if there is one, right? And if there is one, then it will do the stuff that's inside when we're constructing. It could be blank. In this case, we'll preset the values to what we were told. These are the values they told us to set, right? So if I go through this process now and save this, saving that. And they're also asking us, by the way, to create a new application called Show Student 2, right? And so I'll go ahead and do that. It doesn't take very long to do that. So new class, right click, new class, and we'll call it Show Student 2 with a public static void main. And I'm just going to give you some example code here. So we'll just use the same student again that we had before. So I'm just pasting it in, new student, pupil, and now we're just going to show the ID number, points, and hours. Of course, I name my grade point average thing something different, so I got to fix that. So I'm going to save this and run it. And what this will show you is, notice I'm not setting ID, points, and hours. The constructor is doing it automatically at this point. So when I hit run on this, you will notice that it's grabbed those default values from the constructor, right? And then I can go in and adjust those. If I were to make any tweaks to this, and there's that kind of one point of contention in here when you look at the book description where they do this, also has a field for grade point average. I could store that, I'm just kind of putting it out there inside the thing. It's not how I opted to do it, but that is a thing, right, that you can do. All right, so this is the solution then for exercise 12, all three parts. And that wraps it for the night, folks. And I'm going to stop the recording here. So this recording ends right